data analytics. So I don't have a ready answer for that, but the fact is that at a time when big companies like IBM and Uber and Microsoft are filing patents in data measurement, data analytics, data representation, artificial intelligence, and consumer choice, around 5 lakh patents. We have in total, the total number of patents filed in India and granted last year were 23,600. So in fact, we are quite a long ways behind some of the other countries in filing patents and innovations. Part of it is also that our research is lagging behind, particularly in data management. I have a presentation, so I'll share the screen, and from there we will move into the subject. And if you have questions or interactions, you can please raise it on the chat, and I will try to answer it as I go along, or we can have a question answer session after we complete the session. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about research design and ethics in computer science. One of the core experiences, or one of the personal experiences that I have had in computer science research ethics is when I was the legal member of the IIT Madras Biomedical Research Ethics Committee. So as a member of that committee, I understood a lot of things about how computer scientists look at ethics, and also how they look at ethics committees. So many computer scientists, and then I'm not talking about each one of you, but this is the general understanding, and also global research on ethics and computer scientists kind of validates this, but I'm sure that each of us have different ways of looking at it. So computer science has impact on almost all our lives, and today we cannot escape computers, we cannot escape technology. So therefore, there is no area of research or science or life where we cannot avoid computers. So the potential ethical dilemma that you all face as researchers in computer science and researchers in data analytics or artificial intelligence is multifarious. How are we going to address these ethical concerns? And is there a future of possibility of a code of ethical computer science research that can be developed? These are some of the questions that may come up as we discuss this paper, but let's see as we go forward. There is probably, I'll have to start where normally everybody starts a research ethics paper, and that is with the Nuremberg Code. So after the Second World War, when the Nazis were being prosecuted, Nazi Germany was being prosecuted for war crimes, one of the things they noticed was that horrendous medical experiments were happening in the concentration camps where the Jews and the other undesirable population of Germany had been put. So some of these research lacked good research design. It was illogical research design. And many of them were not reported. Most of the research remained underground or secret. Research was carried out and secret results were maintained by the army, the German army, and German Air Force, and so on. And some of these research, the research that was conducted had to do with high pressure, putting people in high pressure situations, like really putting a lot of pressure on them, putting them in the cold sea to see how much temperature a human body can bear, how much heat a human body can bear, how soon people will die if they are deprived of oxygen, and so on. All these research results, although conducted horrendously, were very useful subsequently to the US space industry and to the space industry of many other European countries as well. Similar research was also being carried out by the Japanese in China, and maybe in other countries as well, but we don't know much about them. In any case, after the Nuremberg trials, so the Nuremberg trials had two components. One was of the war criminals, the army officers, and so on. The other component of the Nuremberg trials was the doctors' trial, where several doctors were put on trial for carrying out unscientific research and for causing pain, harm, and death to their subjects. So from that period onwards, at least at a global level, there is an understanding that scientific research and society must have a contract when a researcher approaches society to provide research or to provide scientific content, then they have to follow a certain contractual obligation towards the society or the participants in their research. This social contract is based on three ideas. The first one, that all research should be responsibly conducted. Irresponsible research, just frivolous research, research for the fun of it, should not be conducted. And if it is conducted, it will not be considered to be responsible research. The second, clear and complete recording and reporting of research procedures, analysis, and results. So, whenever a research is done, then there is a clear understanding that the researcher should and must report all the research results. There may be negative results, there may be partial results, there may be positive results. The researcher cannot decide what positive results they will report, and they will not report the negative results, or they may not report the ambiguous results. That is not permissible. Under the contract and the obligation that researchers have towards the people, they must report all results, positive, negative, and partial. Respect for those who might be affected by the research. So no computer science research is conducted only for the domain. Computer science research is conducted so that devices, products, platforms, processes, algorithms may be used in the real world. So whenever they are used in the real world, there will be participants who are affected by it. So for instance, if a computer researcher decides to do research on traffic governance, and they put up sensors on the roads, and they put up sensors in the traffic lights, and they decide how much traffic is passing through this road and how many accidents are happening and so on. It looks like a very mathematical thing that is happening in the lab, but when that sensor is put on the road, and when that sensor and system, the automatic traffic management system or whatever they are coming up with, is put on the road, then who are the participants and stakeholders who are going to be affected? It is not only the people who are driving the cars and sitting in the cars or bikes, but also the pedestrians, maybe the neighborhood, the people who live in the streets, the people who are homeless, the people who are coming into the street by mistake, or if there is a school or hospital, then how this particular research or this particular result is going to affect all of these people needs to be taken into consideration by the researcher, and then he has to or she has to make sure that they are all adequately compensated or supported by the research. In general, scientific persons of any domain are quite offended by the fact that there should be oversight by ethics committee. So I will give you this example because it's quite openly known. So when I sit in ethics committees, whether it is in SRM College or IIT Madras or Apollo, I am the chairperson of the Apollo Ethics Committee. So when I sit in the Apollo Ethics Committee, one of the things I realize is that many scientists are quite upset. Clinicians, doctors, scientists, computer scientists, they are quite upset. Why do we need to be supervised by a lawyer, or why do we need to be supervised by a social scientist? What does a social scientist know of my domain? My domain is so specialized, and I am the master of my domain. So why should a social scientist, or why should a religious person, why should a lay person have ethical oversight over me? Don't you trust me? Do I not know what is ethical and not ethical? So there is a little bit of a negativity there among the scientists, and I'll come to that in a bit, and we can also discuss it as we go forward. The second is getting consent. So you have to go and ask the patient, or you have to go and ask the stakeholder. You have to explain your research to them, and then you have to ask them, are you willing to participate in the trial? Let me give you an example. So one of the professors at IIT wanted to do a research on whether the students would be happy to have facial recognition attendance system. So basically, he said that it is not necessary for the professor to come and take attendance. The system will be there, the camera will be there. Each student's face will already be recorded in the database. The camera will scan the classroom. Then the camera will know who all are there, and the platform will automatically record the attendance of the students. Now, as ethics committee, we said no. It looks a little dubious because there is a fear that privacy will be violated of these students. So why don't you ask them if they want to participate in the research? So when the professor asked them, most of them said no, we don't want to participate in the research. So the professor felt that the students were not understanding the importance of the research, and it is very tedious to explain to a person, see, this is the research, this is the research, please participate in my research. So getting consent is a tedious process. The third is that ethical oversight curtails research freedom. So I, as a researcher, should have full freedom to explore and exploit all the possible research opportunities that are there. But when an ethics committee says, no, you can't do this because it's a vulnerable population, you can't do this because he's a student, you can't do this because he's an employee, or you can't do this in a school because they are minor children, then it curtails research freedom. So many researchers feel, what is this? I can't do research, and all because the ethics committee feels that I'm doing unethical research. And the last point is also that what is the importance? What are you going to achieve? Ultimately, technology is moving forward. So this is one of the explanations that were given to us. Whatever curtailing you do, eventually technology is going to come into your homes. It is going to come into your classrooms. Cameras are going to see where you are. Location is going to be measured on Google or Uber platform or whatever. So what are you trying to protect? What is the importance right now of ethical oversight? So those issues are difficult for us as ethics committees to explain to researchers because we are not able to talk on the same language. So we come from the legal background. I come from the legal background. My committee members who used to sit at IIT Research Park were from different domains. So there was a lay person, meaning that a person who was not an engineer or a scientist. Then there were social activists and social scientists who were sociology professors or come from an NGO. Then there were persons from the disability community. Then there were two, within quote, spiritual people who were philosophers. So one was a person from Ramakrishna Mutt, and the other was a humanist, a person who did not believe in God, but who had a humanist perspective, who believed in spirituality and philosophy, but not religious philosophy. So we are all sitting there and we are deciding whether this research should happen or not. So of course, you can put up your comments on chat. How would you like if this kind of a committee asked you, what kind of research are you doing? This research does not seem to be ethical. Does it create an impact on you? Do you feel that it is negative? You can always put your answers on chat. Now, again, based on my experience and what I've done in ethics so far, I have identified some of the issues. Maybe there are more issues and you can put them up on chat and we can discuss them, or in questions later on. What are the different issues that I note? The first is measurement techniques. Every language or every code that you have, every type of computer language, every kind of object code, every type of semantic, and every time there is a version change, there is a change in measurement. And it appears that these measurement techniques, they're also debated. So a computer scientist from IIT Madras or a computer scientist from VIT will not agree with the measurements on the same device or a similar device made by a professor, say, in Symbiosis Institute, particularly if these results are contradictory. So there are these issues that come up with the use of devices that there is no commonly understood standardized process for measurement of results. Can we do that? Yes, maybe if multidisciplinary groups of people sit together across different institutions, then we can achieve some degree of parity. But right now there is quite a lot of confusion that I note, and it's very interesting. So I'll give you an example once we finish this. Experimental protocols. So how to measure also depends on the research design. And I'm noting that different researchers have different design protocols to research the same process. So here on the right, you have an example. So this is a temporal, and these are genuine research results. I'm not giving you the name of the institution or the researcher because that would be a violation of confidentiality and conflict of interest, because these reports have been submitted to me. So I will just discuss this with you. So if you see here, temporal visualization of constructs relating to upper limb use and intensity from a healthy participant and a patient. So if you see here, a certain device will give us these kind of answers. A certain experimental device will give us these answers. But a similar measurement taken by a different device will give us completely different answers. Now, how do you correlate them? To give you a simple example, if you take the same scan from Anderson scan, and I'm using these scan centers in Chennai, but you will have other scan centers. So the same scan, let us say tibia scan or finger scan from Anderson scan will differ from say Madras scans or Lifeline Hospital. So what happens is when a doctor who is trained in that device and that kind of measurement has to deal with a device and measurement from another hospital, they find it difficult to correlate. These measurement devices are, and particularly when they are at the experimental stage, we have a lot of difficulty. One example is that I'm sure that you all know, you have all seen or used an ultrasound at some point. So this ultrasound scan, the one of the biomedical research groups in computer science had come up with a small scanner, which if you keep at your carotid artery on the side of the neck, you will actually be able to sense the thickening of the carotid artery. And apparently, by measuring the thickness of the carotid artery, you can actually tell whether that person is vulnerable to high blood pressure, even if they don't have it currently, or other cardiovascular diseases. Now, that particular device will give these measurements, but another device, a more sensitive device, a more less sensitive device, will all give different measurements. So having an understanding of experimental protocols and measurement techniques becomes important, particularly when you're doing experiments with a vast amount of population. So an example is that a healthy volunteer and one type of patient may give a different result, but a healthy volunteer and comparing with a different type of patient might give you a completely different answer. Statements of hypothesis. Quite often, before it comes up to the ethics committee, most of the research protocols will go through a scientific committee. The scientific committee is actually tasked with checking out the scientific validity of the hypothesis, the experimental protocol, and the techniques that are going to be used. But that does not prevent the ethics committee from also asking similar questions. One example I will give you. This is not with computer science, but in general example. So I don't know if you know of a particular kind of a yoga pose, which involves you holding your ears like this and doing squats. Have you seen that? So some people have called it brain gym yoga or brain yoga or something like that. And certain students from the physiotherapy unit of a college of which I'm ethics committee member had come up with this. And they said they wanted to check if students did this 10 times a day in the morning, whether their focus was improving. Now, the thesis is very simple. By doing brain gym yoga for so many times per day, whether focus is improving. But they were not able to measure all the other variables. What if the student was also taking tuition? What if the student was going for some distractive activity like sports or taking up a new hobby? So the hypothesis was very clear, but it was not measuring any of the secondary variables. This quite often happens to be a problem with the research that we are seeing, at least student research that we are seeing. Results and conclusions, always a problem. Like I said, many researchers are very uncomfortable talking about negative results and partial results. But there are also researchers who are uncomfortable about disclosing socially unacceptable research. For instance, one of the I'm as an ethics committee member of the National Institute of Epidemiology, we come across a lot of research to do with epidemiology. Epidemiology is the prevalence of disease in a particular population. So this particular researcher was studying the prevalence of HIV and STDs in long haul truck drivers. So truck drivers who were traveling from say Punjab to Chennai or Kashmir to Chennai, who would not be meeting with their families for 14 to 15 days in a month. So they wanted to see what is the extent of HIV and STDs in these communities, the driver community. But while they were doing research, they also ended up testing the wives and spouses and partners of these men. And they discovered that the women also had a high prevalence of STDs. So in the half yearly, the 6 month report when the researcher made the presentation, He made the presentation saying that the women were also suffering from several STDs. But in the final outcome, he did not present any data on the women, and he restricted his results only to the results regarding the men. So when we asked him, what is this? You have left out some of the very important results. He pointed out that in Tamil Nadu, it will not be acceptable if we say that women are promiscuous. It will not be acceptable if we say that women are suffering from STD. So we left out the research. Now, honestly speaking, as ethics committee, we were quite upset. We said, no, it is not ethical. You must put out all the results and conclusions that come out. And it is up to the government to take whichever research or whichever component of the research to act upon. But as a researcher, it is not your job to decide which results I will present and which results I will not present. Identification of at-risk populations. In computer science, and in particular in the last couple of years, because of the pandemic, one of the largest at-risk population is the children. So most of us have brought up our children not to have access to computers, not to have access to AI devices like Alexa or Siri. But unfortunately, in the last couple of years, all this has gone, and they are all completely integrated into the AI system, integrated into the internet, and so on. So a lot of research should be done on at-risk populations like children and minors, but is not being done. So when we look at research, we must identify a patient who is not vulnerable versus a patient who is vulnerable. A patient who is not vulnerable may be an adult person who doesn't have any other difficulties and who is not going to suffer from social or other stigma. But a vulnerable person may be a transgender person, a child, a woman of childbearing age, a pregnant woman, a woman who is breastfeeding, or a person having some other disease like an STD or HIV or leprosy, or it may be a very poor person, a highly disadvantaged person. Such persons and such populations are generally vulnerable to exploitation. So when we do research, we should be careful whether we are doing research within, particularly when we are doing with at-risk populations. But if we have to do research, then we have to take special measures to make sure that they are not harmed in the research. Privacy and constitutional rights issues are extremely important in computer and network and internet research. As we know, privacy is a huge issue. Today, most of our digital health records are online, accessible by anybody. For instance, a couple of days ago, some of my family members were very excited that they could check their RT-PCR results online, and they were very excited about it. They said all that you have to put is your phone number and you will get your research. And to me, it was immediately a flag of privacy. If I can see my results and also my children's results and my mother-in-law's results and so on, then who are the other people who can see my research? Who are the other people who can see my data? So these issues are becoming increasingly important, and probably not so because we are lawyers, because we are in the profession of ethics, we are able to see them. Those who are not and who are only primarily in research may not even see this as an issue. Here is an example. So let me ask you, I have been talking for too long. So let me ask you, do you see any problem with this particular system, which is a biometric system of attendance for minors?
Yes, participants, anybody, any questions?
Okay, though all those who say that there are some issues with this particular or this type of invention, can you raise your hands? I mean, your reaction. Is the reaction button for raising your hand? Yes, yes, Professor Vijay Lakshmi. Can you tell me what is the issue with this? Why do you see an issue?
Probably the Aadhaar cards of all the human beings are linked up with the biometrics, and that kind of information is lost. The privacy of all the individuals is lost.
Yes, isn't it? Thank you for pointing that out. Not only that, this mantra also provides this kind of service in bus stations and in restaurants and so on. So the records of a minor child who did not voluntarily, so who puts the minor child's data on the net. It is the parent. It is not the minor. So the minor child has no idea that he or she has a right to privacy or that her data is online, but it's online and it can never go offline. Nobody will be able to remove it. She cannot be forgotten once she is online. Anyone else see any other issues with this? So these are young children. What if one of them loses some of these prints? For instance, what happens if they lose their fingers? What happens if their face changes? What happens if they lose their eye? So what happens is that they will start, maybe if you are an adult, then you can find other ways of registering yourself or being identified because you have driving license, you have a PAN card, you have a marriage certificate, you have your professional ID. What about a child, where probably the only identity that a child has is their Aadhaar card or any of these ID methods? So what is responsible research conduct? We already discussed a little bit about measurement, so I'm not going to go again into that unless you want to understand that. The second important aspect is most of the environments in which computer science researchers are working are not natural systems. They are not the physical area. They are operating in a constructed area where human beings have constructed these systems. So they are doing their research in the banking sector, or they are doing their research in the Aadhaar environment, or they are doing their research within some data analytics platform managed by, say, Reliance or Jio, or some digital health record which is held by Apollo or some hospital. So when you are working in an environment built by human beings, then you also must understand that the person who built the environment also has their biases. They also have an understanding of how a particular thing should be measured, and therefore that bias is built into this. One of the very interesting questions that I ask when I teach ethics is the trolley problem. Have you heard of the trolley problem? The trolley problem is a very interesting issue. So this is what you have to imagine, that there is a runaway railway carriage or trolley on a track, and the trolley is just rushing on the track, and on that track some two people are working. All right, on the next track there are five people who are, or there is one person who has been tied to the track. So here on the track that the trolley is moving, there are two people working. On the other track, there is one person who has been tied to the track, maybe by some gangster or somebody who is wanting to kill that person or whatever the reason. So there is a tied up person there. Now, if you had a possibility of pulling a lever, right? Pulling a lever, if you pull the lever, the trolley will move from the track on which it is going to the new track. Would you pull the lever? All those who say they will pull the lever, please raise your hands. Did you understand the question? All those who didn't understand can ask. I will repeat the question. Anyone would like me to repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah? You want me to repeat the question. So this is the trolley problem. So a runaway carriage is running on a railway track. On the same railway track, two people are working. There is a lever. If you pull that lever, the runaway carriage will go to another track where there is one person who has been tied to the track. Will you pull the lever?
From my end, this is Kiran Mai.
Yes, Kiran.
Yeah, I feel that we should not be pulling the lever, because the people who are working there, they will be cautious while they are working, because they will move aside once they see this running thing. But
Okay.
Whereas the person who is tied up, he cannot move. So we have to save him. So that is my answer.
Thank you very much, Kiran Mai. Thank you. Anyone else has an opposing answer to that or a contrary answer to that? Anyone who would pull the lever?
Is this the question of ethics comes whether to save two people, what you call it as take the life of one person? Is this the question that is posed by this problem?
Yes, maybe. Maybe. So what would you do, Professor?
Yeah, ma'am, can you stop sharing one second? I'll just
Yes.
share this one. Yeah. 1 second.
You have the problem.
Yeah, I have the photograph. I'll just
Very
share.
good. Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Is this the one? More or less.
Yes, yes, exactly. This is the one,
Yeah.
right?
So, are you going
Okay,
to
so
use
in
one
this case,
person or you going-
both are tied.
Yeah.
Yes. Now what will we do, Miss Kiranmai?
Ma'am, we have to pull the lever because we can save more. Yeah.
We'll save more people, and suppose that
No,
person.
we will try to stop the train.
Yes, we will try to
We
stop.
have to
Yes.
save both. Yeah.
Stop. Yes, why
Some
not?
alternative.
Some alternative, any alternative.
No,
Yes,
one
ma'am,
can be
Kiranmai.
shifted from the railway track, no?
Sorry.
That one person, he can be shifted, no?
He's tied actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
He can save all, no?
We will have to be Superman, sir. We will have to be Shaktiman.
Okay.
Yes. So, Kiranmai, can I ask you one more question? What
Yes,
if
ma'am.
that single person who's tied there, what if he happens to be your son?
No, ma'am. I still say I will go ahead with my answer.
Very good. Excellent. So, this is what is called an ethical dilemma. So, as Professor Hemant pointed out, what the statement that he made is called utilitarian ethics, where you maximize the benefit for the largest number of people, and some of the minimum number of people may get hurt. What to do? But at least the maximum number of people are benefited. This is part of the utilitarian ethics theory. Now, this seems like a very interesting game to play, but in reality, it has a very strong value system. Check this out. Okay, same story. There is a autonomous car. Okay, there is an autonomous car, and in that autonomous car, you are sitting as the passenger. Because it is an autonomous car, it does not need a driver, so there is no driver. You are sitting in the car. It's going on a road where on one side is the mountain, on the other side is a cliff. Okay, in front of your car are 5 children playing. Now, if the car tries to brake itself, it will skid, and either it will hit the mountain or it will fall into the valley. If the car does not brake, it will hit the 5 children. What do you think the car will do? Let me add one more variable. Let us say that the person who built the car, and this is where the human made biases and construct becomes important. Let us say that the person who programmed this autonomous car programmed that at all costs he should save the life of the passenger. What will the car do?
So hitting the mountain and going down the cliff is ruled out.
Yes. But if the programmer is like Professor Hemant, then he will say, save the largest number of lives, then the car will fall over the cliff or hit the mountain. But if the programmer says at all costs protect the passenger, then the car will hit the children. So
you mean
yes,
to say that the value of the passenger is of more importance when compared to life of few others, in the sense is like the value importance of the person.
Yes, sir. But what is more important is that whenever we are working with artificial intelligence systems, it is important to take into account the bias of the person who built the system. Okay. If the person's bias is towards utilitarian ethics, then he will program the car, save the largest number of lives. Okay. If the person is of the bias that the owner of the car or the consumer of the product should be saved, then he will say that at all costs, save the passenger. I don't care what happens. So these are constructs and therefore they carry the bias of the people who constructed them. Another example is when Siri, Alexa, and other artificially intelligent products came out in the market as prototypes, they could not understand women's voices and children's voices. One of the reasons that they could not understand women's voices and children's voices was because they categorized them as noise. The only voice they recognized was adult Caucasian men. So if you see, why would that be so? Why do you think that they did not recognize others, voices of children and women?
The data sample was done on those people, I guess.
Exactly. So the larger number of developer community from whom the samples were taken, on which the original algorithm and the neural language processing happened on male Caucasians.
Yes.
So therefore, that is also a bias. So not having diversity, not having equal opportunity is also a bias. The third example is when contractors or developers of the software think more about making the product very good without thinking about the stakeholders. So in this case, Apple's contractors actually used to the Siri would keep receiving, recording, and broadcasting information even when the app was off. So in the original model of Apple, Siri would continue to record and broadcast information to the Apple company even when the app was off. The reason being they wanted to get more natural language samples. But this meant that they heard about medical details, they heard about criminal activity, they also heard people in intimate situations, which were also being processed. Now, the outcome is that the product is very good. Maybe Siri is very smart. But what happens to the privacy and confidentiality of the people whose recordings Siri has kept?
You mean to say that even while talking, we should be careful that there is no mobile nearby
Yes.
where it catches?
Yes, I'm absolutely sure. I'm absolutely, in fact, all our geolocation services and recording services are on all the time.
Yes, ma'am.
It is not so that we are able to switch off the phone at all. I don't think, unless the battery dies, the device is still on. So another area where scientific research is difficult. So there is a professor who works on kinesthetics, whose research often came up for before the ethics committee. So let us say that you are, this is wearable technology. Obviously, you can see that it is the wearable gloves and so on. So if you want to do research on wearable technology, you have to see how Indian hands move. Indian hands move differently from Caucasian hands, maybe Chinese hands, Japanese hands, children's hands, and so on. So when they were studying with how finger movements take place, they realized that people who play piano, people who are able to type fast, people who play veena, and people who are very sedentary, who don't do anything with their hands, all these people have different ways of using their fingers. Some of us are very, very nimble, some of us are very, very stiff. And therefore, when we are doing this research, measuring a normal population is a problem. Who is a normal population? Will you say that a normal population is a person who doesn't know how to type, who doesn't play the piano, who doesn't do anything with his fingers? Is that a normal population? Or is a normal population a person who has one or two activities? For instance, people who do very hard work, like using hammers, or people who do masonry. They have very stiff fingers. Their hands work together. All fingers work together. So when we grip, the little finger has a very important role in gripping. But in a natural sample, we can't decide what is the normal use of the little finger. So the scope of how to measure becomes wider and wider, and standardization of these measurements is very important. And unfortunately, and here is where the interesting thing is, it goes into ethnicity. So every time you have to decide on normal sample, the normal sample, a normal Indian sample cannot be just 5 people from Bangalore. Then you cannot call them normal Indian sample. If you look at Dravidian sample, then you will miss out all the people who live in Tamil Nadu, but who are not from Tamil Nadu. If you look at sample of Tamil Nadu, then you'll get a wide variety of people, because we are getting people who come, immigrant labor may be there, tourists may be there. So how do you measure? So computer scientists have to start understanding social science. Without understanding social science, history, biostatistics, ethnicity, importance of geographical delineation, work and livelihood occupations, they are not going to be able to bring out accuracy in measuring their outcomes. Yet another aspect, a clear and precise description is difficult. So what happens is, every time the result has to be replicated by another researcher. For instance, let us say that you took out an ResearchGate or PubMed or some other paper, you came out with an excellent experiment, and you want to see if the results can be duplicated in your lab. Now, only if the groundwork and the research that is provided is complete, you will be able to research. Now, I've given you an example here. Apparently, brain waves get coincided when we listen to music. Now, what type of music has been suggested here? Familiar music, unfamiliar music, and also trained in music and untrained in music. So whatever the category, they find that brain waves are getting correlated. But when a scientist tries to do a research, which again came up before us, trying to do a research whether classical Western music or classical Indian music has more calming effect on anxiety. So this is a real research done by the computer science department for biomedical research. So they want to know, when people go in for operating in an operation theater, which kind of music should be played in the background so that the anxiety of the person is reduced. And they want to study whether Western classical music or Indian classical music for an Indian person has a more calming outcome. Very difficult to prove. And outcomes are very, or at least in that case, the outcomes were very non-conclusive. It was difficult to show that whether it is positive or negative correlation. And it was also difficult because what is training in Carnatic music became a question. So my daughter has been studying Carnatic music for 4 years. Will you call her a trained Carnatic musician? Or do you have to be trained for 20 years before you become trained Carnatic musician? What is familiar? Ah, yes, this is Chinese music. Ah, yes, this is Japanese music. Ah, yes, this is Russian music. Is that familiar style? Or to say, I know that this is Chinese music written by so-and-so composer in the year 1769 and played with this instrument. Is that familiar? So the variations became, or variables became so wide that it was difficult to come to any conclusion. You could only come to a generalization, not a conclusion. Coming again to research standards. So as I was saying, because different software keeps evolving every 2-3 years, the software evolves, there are new software that comes up. People use open source, free and open source software. So different sources of software are available. Similarly, different sources of hardware are available, and different types of interconnections and correlations are available. It is difficult to standardize any form of work unless you're working in a highly well-funded research institute where everything is proprietary. Like if you have if you're working in the Microsoft lab, or if you're working in IBM lab, where everything is standardized, and sources of the computer software, study, data, device, all the sensors are all standardized. It's very difficult to come up with good research, standardized research outcomes. This is one of the reasons why it happens that IBM files 7,000, 8,000 patents per year, and most of the research institutes in India happen to file only 4 or 5. It is not because we are less smart, but because our environment is less aligned, or our technology is less aligned. We have to work partly with legacy systems, partly with new systems, partly with uncorrelated sources, and so on, our free and open source, and so on. Therefore, our environment is less stable, and therefore some of our research standards are a bit low. What are some of the ethical issues that you might face in your research? The first is the using of students. Is it right or wrong to use students in your research? All those who say it is right to use, it is all right to use your students in research, can you raise your hands? Yes, Professor Sanath, do you say that it's okay to use students in research?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. How is it okay? Can a student say no to you? If you say to your student, I have a research, come to the lab, I will do research with you. Can a student say no?
No, madam. Only like-minded people we can take it for research.
But can a student say no?
Probably I will not face such problems. I have got many students. They usually turn up at third, fourth semester, and they will come to me and approach me, and they will ask what new in the research like that. So I will guide them. Most of the innovative ideas we are promoting in AICT also. That's why they will come to me, madam.
They will come to you, but they will
Yeah.
participate as participants in your research?
Yeah, definitely, madam. Definitely, they will take part in my research.
Okay. So let me tell you, it is a big ethical issue. One of the reasons is because the voluntariness of students, employees, staff, people inside an institution is very difficult to judge. Maybe one particular student has voluntarily come, but if an ethics committee sits and looks at your paper and finds that all your sample, let us say 40 samples, and all 40 samples are students, we will definitely have a big problem with that. One of the reasons is that in order to have a voluntary sample, the sample must be wide and the sample must come from different areas. And when you are getting a sample which is narrow in scope, smaller in scope, and also they are your own students who can't say no, it is a big ethical issue. So voluntariness cannot be judged when you're using students and employees. I know that several, in fact, one example is that one of the professors had a sample size of 11 people, only 11 people. So I asked him, what is it? Is it some, it looks like some astrological number, like something that is that you will do for a puja, 11. And he said, why 11? Why not 12 or 17 or 23? And he says, because I have 11 lab assistants in my lab. That is not acceptable. You cannot make your employees your lab rats. It is not allowed to do research on employee, staff, and students. Similarly, a hospital cannot do research on their own nurses and their own lab assistants and so on. A prison population, people who are prisoners, people who are in a sanatorium, such people cannot be put to research. In fact, one of the biggest ethical issues that we are facing today is corona research, where a lot of research is happening on patients who have been hospitalized, patients who are inside a containment zone. So if you go to a street and there is a lot of corona cases and all the whole street is containment zone, and they want to do epidemiological research inside the containment zone, it's a big problem ethically, meaning that these people are like prisoners. They can't leave that place and they can't say no, because if they say no, then they are afraid that some corporation fellow will write his name and then there will be some repercussions at the back. So please be careful who your sample is. Virtual reality testing, many people are unable to understand even today. If you know like children and some people who are addicted to TV serials, they can't make out the difference between reality and what is happening in the TV serial because they are so integrated. And today our children are so integrated in the virtual environment, so integrated into Zoom environments and so on. And when you do virtual reality testing, it is important to tell them that they are not in a reality situation, that what they are being shown is virtual reality. And this causes anxiety. So people may develop very straightforward anxieties. They may develop nausea, or they may develop some kind of headache and eye strain and so on. But I'm also talking about psychological stress that they will evolve or they will create for themselves by being in virtual testing environments. Monitoring live networks, like research that, like Siri, research that happens live without us knowing that we are being monitored. Either on, so nowadays you see so many WhatsApp messages which are mostly fake, which say that all WhatsApp networks are being monitored, be careful what you put and so on. But the reality is that it can be done if you want to do. So if WhatsApp decides to monitor us, monitor our activity, right now they're not monitoring our messages, they're only monitoring our metadata. So they know how long we are on WhatsApp, what we are, how many messages we are sharing on WhatsApp. They don't know the content of the message because it's end-to-end encrypted. But they do know that I am in touch with XYZ and so many times a day we are in touch. So this kind of monitoring in live terms is a violation of confidentiality. So even if they are accepting it, even if they say, okay, you can do research, we must be careful what we are monitoring. Unlike pharmaceutical research, where there are safety and toxicity studies, Network, computer research, computer science, abstract studies on behavior on online and so on, there are no safety and toxicity studies. In fact, this is necessary. For instance, I was talking about children online or senior citizens online. There are safety and toxicity issues with regard to participating in trials and participating in device trials and so on, which are not yet taken into consideration seriously by our institutions. Let me think of an example. So one example is when we are on 24/7 news channels. So some of us are addicted to these news channels. These are not safe for us. Beyond a certain point, they lead to psychological and other trauma, which we are not even able to recognize today. We call it internet addiction, or we call it screen addiction. But there are safety and toxicity studies that need to be done, which are not being done. Second research paradigm in pharmaceutical research, which is not done again in computer science research, is pilot research. So for instance, before releasing Arogya Setu, they did not do a pilot research. It just went mass immediately on the development of the platform. As soon as they validated the output, they immediately made it mass research. It just came out to everybody and everybody became a user, whether we like it or not. If we have taken the RT-PCR, then we become part of the Arogya Setu database. The third is open label study. So in pharmaceutical research, we do research first for a drug, let us say aspirin for headache. Then you have research on aspirin as a blood thinner. So that is an open label study. That's the second use of that particular device or drug. But again, in these kind of in research in computer science and use of devices, we are not doing that. We don't know what happens if the same device is used for a secondary purpose. And moral and legal consequences, we already discussed what happens in an autonomous car or autonomous traffic management system. The general rules of biomedical research, which are there in the ICMR guidelines of 2017, are also equally valid for all other types of research. So I'm going to quickly run through some of the basic principles. The first is essentiality. So whatever research you're doing should be essential. If it is non-essential, if it is frivolous, if it is just for fun, don't do it. If you're doing it in your lab with 1 or 2 people, or if you're doing it with only a device, or you're simulating it on a computer, if it is only a virtual invention, yes, try it out by all means. But if you're using human beings, or if you're going to put it in the society, if it is not essential, don't do it. Second, voluntariness. Ensure that every participant in your trial knows that he can say no, or he or she has a right to withdraw at any point. And whatever they are informed, please make sure that you inform them completely. In fact, when we do research when they do these kinesthetic research on gait and fingers and eye strain and all that, we tell them that your fingers will pain. After doing 15 minutes of this, anybody's fingers will pain. If you're going to press on something like this for 15 seconds, then your wrist will pain. Do inform your trial participant, even if it is a minor inconvenience, that you will have a minor inconvenience. Are you still interested in doing it? Non-exploitation. There will be people who want to just try out the device. Yes, you can use them, but you can't use, let us say you take a population which can never afford an iPhone and do all your research on them. After that, they will not be able to buy an iPhone, because an iPhone is 60,000 or 1 lakh rupees, and these are populations who can't afford it. That is called exploitation. So you try the device on a different population, and you sell the device or sell the data to a different population. That is exploitation. So you should not do that. You should try the device or try the product on the person who is going to be able to make use of it. Social responsibility. Make sure that these devices or products or data or algorithm that you are generating is generated responsibly and used responsibly. So it is important that researchers see themselves as part of the society in which they are carrying out the research. They are not standing apart and looking into a fishbowl like that. They should not say this is happening in society, I am a scientist. No, they are part of the society in which the research is carrying on. Privacy and confidentiality, we have already discussed. Risk minimization and maximization of benefit. So whenever you are using a human participant or an animal participant, make sure that the harm, pain, risk what do you say, the imprisonment or whatever restriction of the movement of that person, child, parent, patient, or animal is minimized. Cause least amount of harm and maximize the benefit. Make sure that they are able to benefit from the invention. Professional competence. An example is that when we do research on, when we do ethical review on, say, medicines, and somebody wants to try a drug for heart condition on a pregnant lady. So they want to know whether a drug can be given, which is used for heart conditions, can be given to a pregnant lady. Then we ensure that there is a doctor, a gynecologist, and a neonatal specialist or a prenatal specialist also as part of the team. So if you're doing research on students, make sure that you have a teacher who understands pedagogy, who understands students, who is a part of your team. If you're doing research on geography or research on history or research on some local area, make sure that you have a sociologist or a geologist or whatever kind of scientist that you need to work with you. Professional competence does not mean that I am competent in computer science. It also means that the entire team is competent in whatever work they are doing. Institutional arrangement. The institution where you're doing the research should be able to handle all the outcomes. They should have insurance. If there is some accident or if there is some fallout, which is negative outcome, they should be able to handle it. If somebody is hurt or injured, they should be able to handle it. The institution should have an ethics committee. The institution's professors should be capable of understanding what are the ethical responsibilities. Transparency and accountability. What is the budget? What is the scheme? Who is it going to benefit? Who are the researchers involved? Is there any foreign company or foreign government involved in it? Is there a defense or secret component of it which you don't want to disclose? All this should be openly and transparently disclosed. Totality of responsibility. Once the participant becomes our participant in our trial, even if they fall down the stairs, it is our responsibility. Even if they hurt themselves by banging themselves on the wall, it is our responsibility. So therefore, we have to take responsibility for the participant. If a trial participant injures themselves, we should know why it happened. Did it happen because he was sitting in my virtual reality room for 15 minutes, he went out, he felt dizzy, he fell down the stairs? We should know whether that he fell down the stairs has anything to do with our research. At any point, he may have gone home and may have nasal bleeding. We can't say, no, nasal bleeding can't come because of that. It may not come for you, it may come for them. These are real cases that I'm talking to you, by the way. So whenever you take in a participant, make sure the participant knows that they are in your hands and that you are responsible for their good outcome. One example is an elderly gentleman was a part of a trial, and this elderly gentleman was undergoing domestic violence in the house. The doctors did not, one of the junior doctors knew, but the researchers did not know. Eventually, he died because of domestic violence. At that time, the junior doctors are telling the elderly, yes, sir, we knew that his son and daughter-in-law were beating him. This is not correct. Any participant who is under imminent threat, danger, don't take them in your research if you don't want to. If they are vulnerable, if they are have some serious illness, or if they are being subjected to violence in other cases, don't take such a participant in a trial. If you want to help them, file a police complaint. But when you are taking them in a trial, make sure that your patient is healthy, happy, calm, not anxious, not ill, right? Unless you need a patient for your trial. Environmental protection. Many times I have seen researchers being environmentally completely irresponsible. They do research and then they open the window and throw toxic materials outside the window. I have seen this happening. Don't do it. The environment is for us as part of the society and the planet. Make sure that we are protecting the environment. In one trial, they were testing people for diabetes. And after a month, when our monitoring team went there, we found so many hypodermic syringes and all that cotton wool and everything just lying there. No, that is not right. If we are doing experiment, we have to keep our environment clean. This is not only the planetary environment. I'm also talking about the lab environment, the area, the institute where we are working. It is our responsibility. Informed consent, we have discussed payment and compensation. If your research is funded, please pay the participant, even if it's 20 rupees for the bus, or even if it is you're buying them a maza and a banana, please pay them. Please give them whatever time. If they're spending half day in your lab, pay them something or give them some compensation. If they get injured, then make sure that for that injury, they are receiving full compensation. Report adverse events. If the person fell down the stairs after leaving your lab, report it as an adverse event. Don't try to hide it, or don't try to say that it did not happen because of the lab. Make sure that you mention it. Whether the adverse event happened because of this or that, that will come out in the later investigation. But report the incident. Maybe somebody did finger research and he says that my little finger is, I'm not able to use it at all since the day I did your research. Maybe on that day he went and had a road accident. No matter, report it as an adverse event. Make sure that your reporting is transparent. Conflict of interest. If you have both funding interest as well as research interest, disclose it. Say that I am a startup, I am doing this research. If this research is succeeding, then my startup will get a lot of funding and I will also get a patent. This is a conflict of interest. This means that you cannot be trusted with what type of research you will do. Make sure that you disclose the conflict to the committee or to your professor or guide. So make sure that you tell him, see, I am a startup sir, or I am a startup ma'am. I will be very happy if this research succeeds. But when you are guiding me, make sure that I'm not doing something wrong. Vulnerable and special groups, we have already spoken about them. Be very careful. Community engagement, like this digital health record or traffic management, when you're going to work with the whole community, make sure that there is no one person who is taking over. In general, in a community engagement, you will find there will be some politician, there will be some panchayat hero, or there will be some caste boss, or there will be some, big gunda. He will take control. All of you come and stand here. You all say go, this, that, this happens. In social science research, every time we go and do research, we see this. So make sure that when you're engaging with the community, it's on a fair basis. If somebody is trying to take control, either don't engage with that community or inform the community that in spite of what that person says, you are free to withdraw or you are free to participate. Sometimes it may also happen inside a home. An example is that they wanted to measure some quality of living index of elderly people in a household situation. So most of the elderly people are living with their daughters-in-law or sons-in-law, and most of them are, if they are being badly treated, they can't say it there because the daughter-in-law or the son-in-law are listening. So therefore, when you engage in the community, identify who are all the power forces there who are putting pressure on your participant, and make sure that they are not under pressure when they are answering your questionnaire or using your device. Post-research benefit sharing and access. This has to do with non-exploitation. So if you have a nice device, if the device has worked very well, if the participant has benefited from the device, make sure that they can access the device after the research as well. So an example is that you have come up with and real example again, come up with an excellent wheelchair, which has sensors and everything, which can help a person of disability. You try it out in an old age home. They are all very happy with the device. You put the device there, you take all the data, you measure all the sensors and everything. For 1 year, that person has used the chair. Now that person has become independent because the chair is allowing him to go to the market, visit his daughter. All this can be done. Your research is ended 1 year later, and you say, okay, now give me back the wheelchair. This is a very sad situation. It is important that when you are helping a participant and the participant is benefiting from the device, make sure that in your negotiation you say, let him have that device or let her have that device. She has enjoyed the device. She has helped me to improve the device. Let her have the prototype device. This is very important. It's more of participating in the participant's life and being empathetic to them. This is your Arogya Setu platform. So if you see here, it says how Arogya Setu knows about your COVID-19 positive status. To me, it is scary because I'm coming from a legal background and I'm saying to myself, oh, Arogya Setu knows about me. This is scary, right? So because it is government mandated, and because it is applied equally to all of us, to each of us, then I say, okay, as long as it is applicable to everybody equally, without discrimination, and only the government is doing it, and all the data is being managed by the government, it is okay, right? So even when we do research on new devices, even when new platforms are coming in, make sure that there is no discrimination. You don't say, oh, women should not be allowed, transgender persons we don't want, or we don't want people from this community, or we don't want people from that community. Don't do that. Make sure that your research is fair, equitable, diverse, and every person has a right to participate in it. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation, and I'm open to questions if you have any. By the way, this is my book. It's available on Amazon Kindle. Kindle version is not quite inexpensive, but if you like, then you can also buy the hard copy. Yes.
Any questions from the participants?
You can
Anybody has-
also
Yeah.
you can also post your questions on chat, sir, in case
Yes.
you would like to. Yes.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask, it's like with the point you raised was, suppose as you ask a question that is it ethical to involve students in your research?
Yes, sir.
Okay, as you said that it should be volunteer, but what exactly are the guidelines
Yes,
associated?
sir. So you can there is the ICMR ethics guidelines, which I have 1 minute. I will put it up for you. Talks about this talks about extensively about voluntariness. So I would encourage each researcher to please read this. As far as researchers are concerned, I would say you can find it on the main ICMR site. Please, you can also take down the, you can just put ICMR ethics guidelines and you will find it. One way of avoiding this would be that the recruitment can be done by a different faculty member from a different department. So let us say that I am in computer science. I can ask the geography department, ma'am, can you please identify 10 students? Then I can ask the history department, ma'am, can you identify a few students? Then I can ask the engineering department, ma'am, can you identify a few students? Then those teachers or those faculty members will be explaining to them, this is the invention, this is the department, this is the professor, and this is the research that is being conducted. So there the teacher will say, if you don't want to do, don't do. Please be free, be voluntary. It is only our student that we are not allowed to research on from our lab, our department, anyone. Say, but if I'm the principal of the college, then all are my students. If I'm the dean of research, then all are my students. So what is important is that I should see that whoever is joining my research is voluntarily joining my research. Similarly, if we are doctors and I want to do cardiac research, I can't do on my patient. So what I will do is I will tie up with Department of Gastroenterology and I will say, why don't you identify 5 patients? Then I will say orthopedic department, why don't you identify 5? So that way there is some degree of voluntariness. That is the one way of overcoming this.
Jointly, can they do, in the sense is like, see, for example, in computer science, what happens is majority of the students would have a project to be done in the final semester.
Yes, sir.
Usually, most of the researchers or most of the faculty members would give a problem, which is a part of their research, or a problem that they might be working. They give a subsegment of that one and ask the students to jointly work. It's not like they completely entrust everything to the students, but they jointly do it. So is that becomes a part of any ethical issue, or is it valid?
So in this case, it depends on who is recruiting. That is the most important part. If the student is recruiting a peer group person, then he can always say, yeah, if you don't want to be, don't come, right? But the student should also be trained. The student should not go and say, you know, that professor who is also your professor in mathematics department, he is also my guy. So you better participate. This is lack of voluntariness. So it is also important for the student to know from this period onwards how to get informed consent. So, and they can have a reciprocal arrangement. I will participate in your trial, you participate in my trial. All that is possible.
Especially in medical research and all, these issues crop up very significantly, I guess.
Yes, sir. They do. In computer science, I think the question comes up because all the research that is applied in human society, there these issues will come.
Yes.
For instance, in using sensors or in using chips and devices and measurements.
For health monitoring systems.
Health monitoring. Yes, sir. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes.
So when we are doing a trial on the student, that will be a problem, you're saying, right?
On our own student.
Yeah, that is main concept what you're saying.
Yes, yes.
So they are concerned. Yeah.
Our staff, our lab,
Okay.
our junior, our associate professors, our interns. That is a problem. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Sir.
So you mean to say that suppose I am doing a research on the behavior of a student during the classroom or something
Yes.
like that. So using my own students for my research or the data is unethical.
Is unethical. Yes. If ethics committee will treat it as unethical. Yes.
Basically, I feel maybe you are feeling that those kind of results may be a biased results, maybe because of that you want to avoid. That's what I feel.
It is because of voluntariness, Professor Kiranmai. It is because of voluntariness. Is it that the student could say no? Can the student say no?
Yeah. So if he comes out voluntarily, then that is well and fine.
Yes.
The results may also be correct.
Yes.
But you don't want the results to be biased
Yes.
because if we choose such kind of, our
Yes.
own institution
Yes.
people.
Yes. Apart from that, it is also, no, very good point you are making. Apart from that, it's also a question of, how the institution functions. Are you going to get a wide sample? You're not going to get. You're only going to get a very narrow sample. So if you're only going to get a narrow sample, then the results cannot be extrapolated to a wider audience. You will only be able to look at a narrow sample.
Yeah. Yes.
That is also, yes. Good point. Good. True.
So ultimately, you mean to say that people who wish to be a part of your research should fearlessly say that I don't want it.
Yes, exactly. They should be able to say it. Yes. In fact, when we do research on clients and so on, we are very conscious that they will definitely, because she's my lawyer or she's my patent agent or she's my, then I don't want to have a negative impression on her. So that's a problem. We have to. So in general, I will just try to avoid working with them. But
usually you see, no, ma'am, when we go to a mall or somewhere, you find people who would like with a questionnaire would come and ask you, sir, can you please give some, that definitely 99.9% you would say that no, because we are not compelled, we are not bound by any compulsion.
Exactly.
It's our freedom. If you have time, you just give it, otherwise you just leave it off.
Yes, sir. Very true, sir.
Yeah.
That's a good example. Yes.
Yeah, obviously. So no, we have faced, in the senses when you look at ourselves on the other side of the what we call it as beam. So definitely many a times when we find the market research, basically we call that one as the market research.
Market research.
So there is no compulsion. Many a times they do come to home saying that, say, we want some feedback or something like that. We openly say, no, boss, I'm not free or may not be interested.
Yes.
If you have that freedom, probably then you say that
perfect.
That's very more ethical of conducting a research in that manner.
Absolutely. That's a very good way of saying
so
that.
Any other questions from the participants? Okay, ma'am.
Let me ask you, you can put it on chat. What are the 2 things you learned which you never knew or which you didn't know before this session? And what are the 2 things you will do differently from today onwards?
Participants, it's up to you.
Yep. No compulsion. Yes.
Ma'am, one more question, ma'am.
Yes, Professor. Yes.
Ma'am, regarding there are situations where junior researchers are put into pressure or stress by the senior researchers that you have to tamper the data and present. Is ethical, ma'am?
No, it's not. It is definitely
we
not.
We are put into under pressure that you have to tamper it and you have to, for publication, you have to do that. You have, for submitting report, you have compulsory. It's a pressure, ma'am, actually.
Yes.
Is it ethical?
No, it is not ethical, sir. And whenever you are put under pressure, it means that it is unethical. So one is the pressure. The pressure itself is unethical. And the second is tampering with the data, not giving accurate results is also unethical. And mostly in an ethical dilemma, this is the problem, that it's not easy to make a decision. it will be very tough to avoid the pressure, I think. So yeah, but I believe that if we spread the knowledge of ethical behavior among researchers, then over time we will have good research. Yes, sir. I think we're done.
That was nice talking to you. Yeah, yes, ma'am. How to, Kiranmai is saying how to choose the data for research is one
Yes.
thing that we have to understand. Yeah, definitely. Whether it's computer science or any other social research, there are a lot of things that we have to be careful about.
Yes.
Just to say that the research has got some meaningful outcome.
Yes.
As you said, if it is a biased one or narrowed down to a specific people, for 10 people and for a population like India, you can't do research on even hundreds is not a valid number, if I'm right.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
So for 1.39 billion people, at least your data should run into a few thousands and lakhs.
Yes, no doubt.
So thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for your valuable time. It always been nice hearing to you. We hope we'll have few more sessions, especially on IPR and other things which are your specific or your specialized domains. So thank you very much, ma'am. Swapna, ma'am. Thank you for taking your valuable time and giving us insights into this. And I would like to thank Professor Aruna Madam also for connecting to you. Thank you all of you for this wonderful session. I request all the participants to kindly fill up the attendance sheet and feedback sheet so that we can share it with the speaker. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aruna.
Thank you, Sapna. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Participants, the window will be open for another 5 minutes. Kindly fill up the attendance sheet.
Sir, I have a question here.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, while filling the form, there is something called time. So, what do you mean, like when it started, or how is that?
No, at any time, what time you are filling it up? That's it.
Oh, okay.
Dear participants, kindly fill up the attendance sheet. Another 2-3 minutes, we'll be exiting the meeting. Thank you.